You chose to do your phase 2 and 3 trials in Iran. How did it come about that you did your trials in Iran?
So going back a couple of years, we'd completed a phase 1 clinical trial here in Adelaide. At that time, there was really no circulation of COVID-19 in Australia, fortunately, because of the quarantine policy. But that was great, for people living in Australia. Bad if you're trying to develop a vaccine, because in the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, your whole focus is to prove that the vaccine actually is stopping people getting infections. If there's no infections, it means you can't actually show that. So you can't test your vaccine. So at that time, our only choice was to go overseas to do our phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, because we had to go somewhere where there was a lot of disease being transmitted, so we could actually prove our vaccine would stop that transmission of disease. And so when we were looking around at countries where we might be able to test it out, at that time Iran had some major problems. In fact, some of the highest rates of infection in the world. And we found a great partner there, Synergen, who were keen to take our technology and help us to develop it and to do the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials for us. And really that was an offer we couldn't refuse. It was a perfect situation where we were going to be able to test the vaccine in a situation where there was a lot of disease. And so we could really then see, did our vaccine work or not? And as we all know, the phase 3 clinical trials unequivocally showed that it was actually able to prevent disease with, in fact, the Delta variant.
Synergen is a private pharmaceutical company in Iran. Can you tell us a little bit about Synergen and how you came to be working with them?
So a lot of people probably in this part of the world haven't heard of Synergen, but if you go and talk to anyone across the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, Synergen is one of the most famous companies. So it's a completely private company based in Iran. It was set up by scientists and pharmacists who are looking to make biological drugs, which are the monoclonal antibodies that are now, blockbuster products in the Western world, but weren't being produced or available in the Middle East or in large parts of the developing world. So they were one of the first companies to develop that technology to make these complex molecules. And so now they're one of the fastest growing and biggest pharmaceutical companies in the Middle East and have products which they distribute to many countries around the world. So it turns out they're the equivalent in Iran, for instance, of CSL, which is the largest pharmaceutical company in Australia and in the same league. So it was wonderful to partner with them and be able to tap into all of their resources. And as I say, they really are a tremendous partner.
Does the Iranian government have any stake in Synergen?
No. So again, we all know about the complex politics, with Iran, particularly between Iran and the United States, with various sanctions and disagreements. Synergen is a totally private company, so there's no ownership or control by the Iranian government, and that means that we can openly share our technology with them, and obviously our joint mission is to develop this vaccine and make it available to the world. So there's no politics involved in our vaccine, and Synergen and ourselves, our only desire is to make this available as widely as possible.
Iran is a signatory to the PICS agreement that the UK, European countries, South Africa and Australia are also signatories to. Can you tell us about PICS and why was this important to your decision to use Iran as one of the sites for manufacture of your vaccine?
So PICS is basically a treaty signed by a number of countries, particularly in Europe, Australia, South Africa, whereby they were set up a treaty to essentially create standards in manufacturing of drugs. Because as we know, there are a lot of countries where people are suspicious about the quality of drugs manufactured in those countries because of the different standards that are applied. So the beauty of working with a country that's a PICS signatory is essentially they're all working to the same standards as we use here in Australia, because we're also a signatory to PICS and also to all of the European countries, which similarly are members of PICS. So the fact that Iran is a member of PICS means that we can rely on basically the quality of manufacturing in Iran, and basically that guarantees that it's the same quality as if we were manufacturing the vaccine here in Australia. So yes, it was very important that they are a member, and in fact, as I say, most countries in the world are not members of PICS because they don't necessarily meet those quality standards, but Iran is. So that was a major plus for us.
The AstraZeneca, Moderna and Pfizer phase 3 trials had between 10 and 20,000 subjects in the active vaccine arm. How big was your phase 3 trial?
So the great thing, and we could have only done this with the support of Synergen, because, phase 3 trials are extremely expensive. Companies like Pfizer and Moderna spent between $300 and $500 million on their phase 3 trials, just to give you a sense, to do that, 15 or 20,000 people receiving their vaccine, that's what it costs. So we couldn't have done that alone, but we're able to do it through Synergen. So we had over 12,000 people in our phase 3 who received our vaccine, which is basically exactly the same number of people who received the active vaccine in, the Moderna and Pfizer trials, which were obviously some of the biggest in the world. So we're very confident that our results match up with any of the phase 3 results of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. We didn't, as I say, take any shortcuts, and again, Synergen, their nature is they do everything to the highest standard, and therefore they weren't going to compromise by doing a small phase 3 study. It had to be equivalent to what was being done by the other players. And as I say, that's why we're so confident in the results we obtained.
What did the clinical trials of Spikogen show in terms of overall vaccine effectiveness?
So in the phase 3 clinical trials, so we were able to show that we had 60 to 65% effectiveness against any symptomatic infection with the Delta variant of COVID-19. Now, people might recall, or it's still promoted, that the mRNA vaccines achieved 90% in their phase 3s, but what you have to remember is they were done 2 years ago. They weren't dealing with the Delta variant, and we know if they were dealing with the Delta variant, their efficacy or effectiveness would have been about half of that, potentially even lower than what we were, the high levels we were seeing against the Delta variant. And I think Israel, the health department published that the Pfizer mRNA vaccine was only 39% effective against Delta. So when we achieved a result of 60 to 65% against Delta, we were obviously very, very happy, although like anyone, we're always trying to make our vaccine better and more effective, and that's what we're doing right now with our Omicron variant vaccine.
Your current vaccine is also based on the original Wuhan spike protein sequence like the others. Were you surprised by the level of effectiveness you achieved against the Delta strain, given its level of difference to the original Wuhan strain?
Look, we were quite worried because we knew that, we weren't, by the time we did our phase 3, that we were dealing with a completely new variant being Delta, and we knew that the existing vaccines were doing very badly against Delta. So it was quite scary. It was because it's like apples and oranges. They were able to show effectiveness against Wuhan, which was easy in retrospect. We were taking on the toughest challenge at the time against Delta. Yes, I was terrified. that, we might only say get 50% effectiveness or lower against Delta. So getting 60 to 65% was really a great result. And I think it reflects the fact, and we see this in animal models, that because of the sugar ingredient, the magic chemistry of vaccine turbocharger, not only does it make the vaccine more effective, but it actually broadens the immunity you get with the vaccine, so that when you do have situations like this with variants or influenza, where you have different strains of influenza, we typically see this much better protection against different strains. So in a way, in retrospect, maybe we could have anticipated the result against Delta because of the nature of the adjuvant in our vaccine, but certainly it was very exciting to get that result.
In the clinical trials, did you look at the ability of your Spikogen vaccine-induced antibodies to neutralise the different SARS-CoV-2 variants?
So yes, in our phase 2 trial, we were able to look at the neutralising antibody generated by our vaccine, which was based on the Wuhan strain, but we were able to develop assays using the viruses for the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, lambda strains of the virus, and see if the antibodies from those subjects in our trials was able to kill all of those different viral strains. And so we were able to demonstrate, as I mentioned before, that our vaccine does induce this very broad protection, and so the vaccine, although it was based on Wuhan, was able to kill all of the viruses from all of the different variants. The only one we hadn't tested back then, because it didn't exist, was Omicron, and we're actually just running those assays essentially as I speak, and I may even have a result on that later today or early next week to know how well we're performing against Omicron.